take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
Anybody who knows me, who's listening to this podcast, who follows me on social media, knows how much I struggle with anxiety. And if you follow me on social media, you'll know, at the time that we're recording this, last week I put out a post about the benefits I've been having with CBD oil and taking that daily and the effect it's had on my anxiety. So today, I'm really excited to welcome Maddie Brown, co-founder of MBL Apothecary, and disclosure, where I get my CBD oil from that's been working so well. But Maddie, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation for sure.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I feel like the Zoom way is the new way to do all the stuff. So here we are. Yeah,
it's weird. Going from, I started this podcast just talking to people in person, and that was always my mission, to have those difficult conversations in person. And now it's like, okay, now I have to do it for Zoom. But it's opened up so many avenues.
True, and people are more available too, because it's not displacing yourself, that type of thing. So there are pros and cons.
Yeah. So you're not only the co-founder of MBL Apothecary, but you're also like a cannabis educator and nurse. That's correct, right?
Yes, exactly.
So basically, you know your shit on this stuff. And I know from talking to some mutual contacts, you've been working in this for quite a while. I'm curious, because obviously you've been working in this before it was even considered legal by the government. How did you fall into this kind of line of work in this industry, especially when it wasn't, accepted by the Canadian government?
Yeah, for sure. So when I went to nursing school, I had a focus in palliative care and pediatrics. And I think a lot of the time in palliative care, cannabis is actually used a bit more regularly than in other lines of care. You don't necessarily want to introduce cannabis to every patient, but when people are dying, palliative care means care for people who are in their kind of last days to weeks of life. I think it's often considered more because doctors and nurse practitioners kind of figure, okay, well, even if the long-term effects of cannabis are not great, this person's palliative, we're looking at it from more of a symptom management approach. So from working in hospice care and both with adults and children where we'd see cannabis being used, I started doing my own cannabis research more than, I was already using cannabis quite regularly, and I had been since I was about 15. So when it came down to work, I started to want to work in the industry. So instead of hospice care, I started working at a cannabis clinic where I was their nurse educator. So people would come in for their appointments and get a prescription for medical cannabis, which has been legal in Canada since 2001. It was actually first prescribed to HIV and AIDS patients who had a really hard time with appetite and nausea. So it was kind of first experimented with then. And I was working in clinics that were helping people get their prescriptions, and then they'd come see me and I would do the education. So, this is what you should be looking for on the website, and this is what you should order, and you take this one at daytime or nighttime. And the clinic was a great kind of ramp for me to start my own business. So now I, through my independent insurance as a nurse, I can give people advice based on their existing prescriptions. And now that cannabis is recreationally legal, it makes it a lot I guess not less responsibility, but there's less medical onus on me because even if your doctor or I say to you, "Ooh, I really don't think cannabis is a good idea," you can walk down the street and buy it anyway, even if I tell you you really shouldn't do it. So it takes a bit of the pressure off of healthcare providers. We can just kind of counsel people as to what the right choice would be. So if it's somebody suffering from XYZ, we'll point you in this direction. And I think that's what the cannabis industry is really kind of tricky to navigate because there's just so many places to go for information. Do you go to Health Canada? Do you go to Weed Maps? Do you go to Leafly? There are so many different, legitimate and well-resourced, well-referenced cannabis sites, but you never really know which one to go to, especially, okay, I want to use it medically, but it's legal recreationally. Do I even need a prescription anymore? that's really how I got into it, was kind of palliative care to cannabis clinics to independent consulting and making my own products for those patients who receive the independent consults.
That's interesting. I'm curious about, so you hear it all the time. And like you said, there's so many different resources now, kind of the medicinal use of marijuana and cannabis and the effects it has on people. What I'm curious, what's the difference? Is there a difference between between them using it medically and recreationally, or do you see the kind of the same benefits if you do both? Like what determines if it's like, okay, no, this is going to help you, medically, I use quotes there, but what determines that's going to help you that way?
I think the biggest thing is probably the effects you feel when you use cannabis. If you're somebody who's super anxious and has terrible sleeping habits, and every time you go get stoned with your friend in a park, you're like, oh my God, my sleep is like amazing after. Maybe is this something I should use every day? Because I take my sleeping pill every day and it doesn't do shit. So maybe I should switch to the cannabis, because every time I smoke, I pass out for 12 hours. So, it becomes, is this actually benefiting me? Versus, I use the example with alcohol. So are you ever really going to be 12 shots into your gin and be like, oh my God, I suddenly feel as though this medical problem I've had forever is resolved? Alcohol doesn't work that way. So when you're drinking for fun, there's never really a point where you're like, oh my God, I could use this as a medicine. With cannabis, you're using it and you're like, oh my God, my anxiety is lessened, or my mood is improved, or that knee pain is gone, or I'm not nauseous anymore. There's never really going to be a time where a doctor will say, I really think this patient can benefit from a prescription for beer. But there's many times now where doctors say, I really think this patient could benefit from a cannabis prescription. And I think that has a lot to do with its drug class. Cannabis isn't a depressant like alcohol is. It doesn't have the same addictive properties as alcohol, or things like fentanyl and opioids or narcotics like that. So I think people are more and more lenient with cannabis, knowing that you can absolutely go home and take too much of it and feel terrible, but it's not the same worry as a doctor who gives a fentanyl prescription and tells the patient to go home and try to figure out a dose that works, right? You'd be worried all night. Is the person going to overdose? Are they okay? Are they sick? Are they breathing? So I think there are risks with cannabis, but it's far, far fewer than your standard medications, which is why I think it's more frequently considered one.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to some of that other stuff there, like risks, and you mentioned a lot of stuff there, but just because there are tons of resources, but I think just starting with the basics, because I think a lot of people don't really know, what makes this a good medicine? What gives people the benefits, right? You hear a lot of different things now, especially now that it's legal, versus, indica, sativa, CBD, all these things kind of get thrown around and people are like, oh yeah, use this. And it's people kind of get overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know, should I smoke it? Should I ingest it? The oil?
Yes.
There's just a lot of things going on. And glad there's people like you who are trying to educate people, because I feel like in a way it was just kind of thrown at us and it was and go, and people have to kind of experiment with it on their own. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. But I'm just wondering, so let's get right to the basics. From the strains of weed, CBD and THC, I mean, it's kind of a lot to unpack there, and a big question with a lot of avenues, but let's just simplify it so people can understand.
Yeah, I think I started doing what actually got me into doing my independent cannabis consulting, as opposed to working through a clinic or through an agency. I designed my own cannabis PowerPoint presentation that I called Cannabis 101, where kind of just dulled down all the terminology and terms so that I could teach it at hospitals and clinics and to other nurses, because I would get calls at 2 a.m. from nurses being like, Maddie, we have a patient here that has a grinder. What do we do with a grinder? And I'd be like, oh God, and these are nurses early 70s, late 60s who have never ever done it. Like, they have no clue. What did
Right.
you put the weed in the grinder and light the grinder on fire? Like, they have no clue. So it became more, I need to teach people so that when patients are using it as medicine, nurses aren't like, well, what the hell do we do? So I'll give you my little kind of cannabis 101, and you just stop me or interrupt me, or we can break it down more as needed. So you kind of let me know when you want to interrupt. So cannabis works through a very complex system. So it's actually called your endocannabinoid system. And that system is naturally occurring in all humans, most flora and fauna, meaning most animals and plants. And it's innate, meaning it's naturally occurring. Even if you've never smoked a joint or had an edible or used a topical product in your entire life, you still have an endocannabinoid system. And it works like a lock and key, meaning if your endocannabinoid system is the lock, cannabis would be the key. So when you ingest it or inhale it or apply it topically, those two things link up like a lock and key, and you experience relief of this huge variety of symptoms. And the reason you experience relief of such a wide variety of symptoms is because your endocannabinoid receptors are scattered throughout your body. And we see these endocannabinoid receptors in three big areas. The first one being your stomach, which is why people with things like Crohn's disease or nausea and vomiting, or I don't know if you've heard of a condition called diverticulitis, which is like inflammation in your colon area. So those people will say, oh my God, as soon as I tried cannabis, it was like, this huge change of relief. You have a huge amount of endocannabinoid receptors in your immune cells. So immune-based conditions like lupus, like psoriasis, like eczema will respond really well to cannabis. And then lastly, you see a really, really huge collection of those receptors in your central nervous system, which starts to make sense for a lot of people because that entails your mental health conditions, things like MS, things like seizure disorders, things like spinal cord injuries, where your central nervous system is lined with these endocannabinoid receptors. So you'll have an MS patient who's been on a slew of different meds for 5 years, and they smoke 3 puffs of a joint, and all of a sudden their nerve pain is gone and their nausea is gone and they have an appetite and their mood's improved and they actually sleep that night. And the doctors are like, well, we've been trying to get those 6 symptoms under control with 12 different meds for 5 years, right? But cannabis isn't considered that frontline agent because it's, for the past 100 years, been considered a risk category 1 stigmatized drug. So we didn't study it the way people study things like chemotherapies or Tylenols or different immune therapies that are out there. So we're just getting there with really researching and finding out more conclusive information about it, because I'm sure a lot of people will argue as well, or not argue, but more just question that there's not enough proof or enough data to say that cannabis is effective for X, Y, or Z yet. And it's not so much that there's not enough proof or data to say that it's effective. It's just we don't know the long-term implications. And it hasn't been possible for us to study it because of what we just said. It's just been this stigmatized, taboo, racially motivated drug, basically designed to put certain people in prison. Actually, the term marijuana was a racist term used to associate it with Mexican migrant workers. So you'd say to people, yeah, the Mexicans with their marijuana are coming here, which is totally ridiculous. And a term that's now kind of associated with that racial bias. So about 5 years ago within the industry, we started rewriting all of the Health Canada and medical documentation to reflect the word cannabis as opposed to marijuana. So it used to be called the Medical Marijuana Regulations Act, and it's now the ACMPR, which is the Access for Cannabis for Medical Purposes Act. So they've changed it in most places, and most healthcare providers will use the term cannabis and trying to get away from marijuana, which is technically a slang term. So that's the other thing, with the recreational stores, people will call it weed or bud or whatever it is. We really stick with cannabis more in the medical industry. And there's awesome stories about that too that I can tell you after, about like awkward strain names and doctors being like, what's the name of this strain? And me being like, oh God. So remind me of that story, but I don't want to get too off my tangent. Is that cool so far, or is that like too much?
I love it.
Okay.
I love when I don't have to say anything. It makes everything like that much better.
Okay, perfect. Well, and I'll go through the next stuff pretty quickly. So it'll probably be about 5 or 6 minutes. The next kind of big thing that makes people a bit more kind of aware or understanding is THC versus CBD.
Mm-hmm.
So now you know why cannabis is effective. It's through that endocannabinoid system. And the two big compounds that we talk about are THC and CBD. There are hundreds of compounds in cannabis, but those are the big ones that are in focus. THC is the psychoactive or intoxicating compound in cannabis, meaning makes you stoned, can make you feel like out of it or impaired. So it's definitely more of a deterrent for some people because they don't like being stoned, or they can't be using cannabis because of their work, or they have to drive. So it definitely becomes more of a deterrent. It is responsible medically for some pretty cool things. So it's fantastic for nerve pain. So people who have spinal cord injuries, people who have, you've probably heard of sciatic pain, where like you feel it in your back, but it shoots into your leg. So those are all nerve pain. THC is fantastic for it. It's fantastic for sleep, and it's fantastic for appetite stimulation. And most people are like, oh my God, it's true. Like every time I smoke, I do end up sleeping and eating. Like that's crazy. So those are its, medical benefits. And there's tons of different conditions where you very well might need to gain weight, or you might need to sleep better, or you do have nerve pain. So, it does come with that high or that psychoactive effect. But when you dose responsibly, you can kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. Same way you dose responsibly with every other thing that your doctor gives you, if that's where you're getting your cannabis. Just
quickly, is there a difference? So if I, take the good shit, that 40, 50, 60% THC compound, if you look at the Ontario Cannabis website, versus like a lower dose, like a 10%. Would you equate that with like taking the stronger stuff of THC? Would that give you more of those benefits? Or is it more based on like a personal, like how your body reacts to it? Like, would you be able to see most of the same benefits with like a smaller dose of THC?
Yeah. So when we talk about, there will always be the issue of tolerance. So for somebody like myself who smokes all the time, I'm always going to have a higher tolerance than my new cancer patient who has never used it before, but absolutely needs something to stop vomiting, right? So they're going to be able to get away with using a much smaller amount than somebody who's been using it long term. That rule does not always apply. I have helped Ottawa Red Blacks players with their cannabis prescriptions, and they take the smallest amount of THC ever, these big 300-pound guys, and they're high for 24 hours. And I have helped tiny little old 90-pound, 100-year-old ladies who say they take the whole bottle and chug it like a shot and they don't feel a thing. And I'm like, like there's no, and it doesn't seem to be consistent. There's no weight, there's no age. It seems like it's medical history, it's tolerance, and it's more the way your body reacts to everything. Some people take Tylenol and their headache's gone in 30 minutes and they feel great. Some people take Tylenol and they're nauseous and they feel like their kidneys feel sore for a week. If your Tylenol usually takes an hour to kick in, your cannabis probably will too. If you're somebody who says, oh my God, I take Tylenol and it takes 3 hours, your cannabis probably will too. Metabolism plays a big role in that. And I think that's why I always tell people, start low and go slow. You can always take more cannabis, but it really, really sucks when you've taken too much. And anybody will tell you that if you've greened out or had too much of an edible, it's not like an enjoyable thing for anybody. So it's all about dosing correctly.
Yeah, that's me. I have one hit of a joint and I'm like, I'm gone.
Yeah, just everybody's so different. And I'm like, I can smoke 20 joints a day and then do a talk like this. And I have I finish a beer and I'm like, where am I? Everybody's so different with alcohol, with cannabis. Yeah. So I tell everybody, unless you're recreationally using it and you want to be super stoned, the same way some nights you do want to go out and have too many drinks, cool. But if you're expecting a medical dose to help with anxiety or help you sleep, you have to take the right amount. You know what I mean? So that's THC. The other side of things is CBD. So Obviously, the biggest difference between the two is that CBD is non-intoxicating, meaning it does not cause you to feel stoned or impaired or out of it. It can absolutely relax you. It can absolutely make you, like people will say, oh, I sleep so well with CBD, but it's not impairing or intoxicating, meaning you're like, oh, I'm so relaxed right now. I definitely shouldn't like go operate machinery. Whereas if you're super stoned, you'd be like, oh, it'd be cool to operate machinery. CBD doesn't impair you that way. So of course it can affect you, but it's not intoxicating. I think that's the biggest difference. It's like having de-alcoholized beer. You're taking the impairing part out of it. So CBD, as you probably a lot of your listeners have heard as well, is fantastic for seizures or tremors. It's fantastic for mental health conditions. So everything from anxiety to PTSD to bipolar disorder to just straight up depression. It is fantastic for inflammatory pain, meaning THC was the one really good for nerve pain. CBD is going to be good for inflammatory pain. Those are conditions like arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, which is like inflammation in your stomach. Anything that ends with the word itis means inflammation. So tonsillitis, when your tonsils are inflamed, appendicitis, and so on. But it's going to be good for anything in that category. So migraines are inflammatory in basis. You'll find a lot of people who swear by their CBD regimen for migraines. And lastly, CBD is actually very good for nausea as well. So sometimes THC can actually make people feel dizzy because it makes you feel stoned. So that can actually make your nausea a bit worse if you're dizzy. CBD really seems to settle kind of upset stomach a lot.
Okay.
So, and then if you have questions there, and then the last thing I was going to really talk about was just the kind of vaping versus edibles, or smoking and stuff versus edibles. But you go ahead if you have
so we'll go to that. But so for CBD, because that's obviously the big one, that's the one I put out. And I got a lot of questions, and I'm sure, people who I just was like, go talk to her. I know nothing. I'm in Google. So obviously from my personal experience, taking it has been wondrous for my anxiety. I feel a lot less stressed, a lot more at ease. Some things for instance, a podcast before, I'd always have a little anxiety, kind of worried about meeting someone new, all those types of things that are normal.
Yeah.
And it's I don't really get any of that. There's still an element of it there, but it for someone like me who's super anxious, I noticed a noticeable difference. I have some people who take it and they say they don't notice anything, that that they didn't feel any effects. They're kind of unsure what they're supposed to feel, because you're not getting intoxicated. They're like, okay, well, how do I know if it's working?
Yeah, for sure.
My first question is, the biggest one I got is the relief instantaneous? If you're really anxious, can you just take a drop, it's gone, and then you don't really have to worry? Or is it more kind of like a dosing thing? For instance, my SSRI antidepressants, I have to take that every day, and it takes a while for my body chemistry to change and need to start to notice the effects.
Right.
What is that? What is it? Is it more of that, or is it more instantaneous relief for the CBD?
For sure. So I think that confuses people a lot with the CBD, is not necessarily knowing when it kicks in, because when you're stoned or when you're drinking, it's oh, yep, I can feel it now. With CBD, it's definitely more subtle. What I find is that a lot of my pain patients are like, oh my God, yeah, it works right away. But mental health patients are like, I don't know if it's working right away, because it is much more subtle. So you were kind of explaining why or how it helped you. So the reason that, had you heard that CBD was effective for seizures before this?
I've and you see videos on the internet and all that stuff. So yeah, I have. Right. I'm familiar with it at least.
So the reason that cannabis is so effective for seizure disorders, or CBD in particular is so effective for seizure disorders, is because one of the things that CBD does is it reduces overactivity in your brain. So when you're having a seizure, in non-medical terms, there's basically way too much shit going on in your brain. It's basically called overfiring. There's too much, and it results in you having this stimulation, this neurological stimulation that causes a seizure. When you are in a mental health crisis, the exact same thing is happening in your brain. There is too much shit going on, too much firing, mixed signals. You're not having a seizure disorder, but you're having a panic attack, or you're having an anxiety attack, or you're having a PTSD flare-up where you cannot control your mood the same way someone having a seizure cannot control their muscle contractions. It's the same thing. CBD doesn't differentiate in your brain about what the overfiring is. So the same way that CBD very clearly works for seizures. I mean, I've watched people having seizures, they take it and then it stops. Can't really deny that working. You're having an anxiety attack, you take the CBD and it stops. So it works the same way. It was just more advocacy for physical and mental health being synonymous. They are the same thing. If you give meds to the same things, they will respond the same way with this reduction in overactivity. So you'll have people with anxiety or with ADHD or with PTSD or with night terrors whose brains are always going, without like sounding rude, I have PTSD myself, without your brain kind of going haywire, and you take CBD, and the same way it would reduce that overactivity in a seizure, it's going to do that for your mental health condition. Now, I have people who say, okay, I've been taking it for a week. I don't notice anything. I'm not really feeling that difference. So they stop taking it. And then I get a message like a week later saying, oh shit, maybe it was working because I'm not sleeping as well as I was last week, or I am a bit more irritable this morning, or I do find that I'm a bit more moody in traffic than last week, right? It's subtle. It's not that kind of hit you with a dose of something the way THC does or the way Tylenol does. If you're taking CBD for mental health, it can be more subtle. I've had patients message me in the car on the way home saying, oh my God, I took it. I feel like it's already working. Is that a kind of like somatic experience where maybe it's just you feel like it's working, so it is? Awesome. If that's what it is, go for it. Maybe it actually starts to kick in 45 minutes, but the second you take it, you're feeling like it's effective. So you're like, okay, this anxiety I feel, I know it's going to go away. So you already feel better. Okay. But I do agree, it's definitely trickier because it's not something that just hits you with this hit of impairment. You are, subtly getting used to it. I've had people who say it takes them a month of playing around with the doses before it works. I've had people saying they tested it by watching a show that they watch all the time, and then they watch it while taking CBD. So it hurts less when they get up off the couch after. Their character that they hate is not as annoying as usual. They're laughing at the show more. So it's you have to kind of really test it yourself. And that's one of the nice things with cannabis is you're in charge of the whole process. If you want to take it at night, go for it. During the day, go for it. You want to take a sativa or an indica or whatever it is, it's your choice. And that's the nice thing about cannabis, that that doesn't really happen with a whole lot of medications where the patient is in charge and not the doctor.
Right. And that's what happened to me. Like I didn't notice it right off the top. It was only after doing those activities that would usually give me some nerves.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
was the podcasts, the going on first dates again after a long-term relationship, things that would make me nervous. I noticed, I was like, oh, here we go. Yeah. Like, okay. But then, and then just, you always get that type of thing from people that, like they take it, they're like, I don't really feel anything. It didn't really work for me. And I'm like, so that's where it goes into like, do I have to take it every day for it to really make an effect?
I tell people that they should be taking it every day, especially when it's for a mood thing. If you just had surgery on your foot, you're going to take it for 2 months and you might never take it again. But mental health doesn't tend to go away. It can be managed, but it's still always there. So in terms of should you take it every day? Yeah, totally. Because maybe if you take it in the morning and in the evening every day, on day 4, maybe you would have had a freak out by now, but you have some CBD built up in your system. So you never really get to that point of being super, super, super agitated or irritable or stressed because you have that kind of baseline CBD in your system. I think that's where I tell people, as long as you don't have a negative, you don't take it and feel awful or take it and have a medication that you shouldn't mix it with. If you take it and feel good, you can take it like a vitamin every day, especially the product that you're using from me that my partner Tiffany and I make. It's derived from hemp as opposed to derived from the cannabis plant, which we can talk about after we kind of finish up the little cannabis 101, but it makes a huge difference for sure in terms of what product you're using. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And definitely want to get to that too. So, and then it brings me to the next question, and as a broadcaster, that great transition and segue into what is better to take, smoking it, ingesting it with the oil, with edibles. A lot of people have different experience with all of them. So and particularly with CBD,
for
what's
sure.
probably better?
So the first thing I will say before I start the little methods of consumption, as I like to call it, the last thing I'll clarify, just because I'm sure it's an area that people have a lot of questions about, is indica sativa. So sativa strains, so there are two strains of cannabis, sativa, indica. Sativa strains, very energizing, very stimulating, very creatively kind of oriented, meaning people who are artists or people who are sculptors find that it really gets their kind of brain going. It provides a cerebral high. So it's more of a euphoric, in your head feeling. People actually call it like house cleaning weed because you want to just be like, oh, I should go and vacuum and now I should do this bookshelf, because it amps up your whole system. Now, for somebody like you or me, that's a really bad idea to use a sativa strain because, and I'm not trying to be assumptuous about your like how you feel, but when I wake up in the morning, for instance, I feel anxious when I wake up. I feel a little bit jittery, a little bit kind of like overwhelmed and kind of like my brain's going a mile a minute. I do not need to take a drug that is going to like literally stimulate me and amp me up even more. The opposite of a sativa is indica, even though it's the worst mnemonic ever, in the couch. It's like the worst, but nobody ever forgets it. It is relaxing, sedating, that couch lock, sit on the couch with your eyes half closed, and then you pass out feeling. So for somebody like me who's amped up all the time, that's what I need, regardless of if it's daytime or nighttime. I don't ever use sativas. Whereas my partner, who's designing our logos and doing our jewelry and making product, is using a sativa strain, and she doesn't have that pre-existing anxiety that I have. So she just gets more and more creative. Whereas if I woke up and used a sativa strain, I'd get more and more in my head. And when I tell people that, you see like people in the audiences at my talks having this like eureka moment in their head, being like, oh my God, every time I smoke, it must be a sativa because I feel anxious and wired and blah, blah, blah. And then you tell them that and they go to the store or go online and purchase the right thing. And they're like, oh my God. Like I've had people say, I've been using a sativa strain to try to sleep every night for the past year. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'll do nothing for your sleep at all. In fact, it reinvigorates all of your cells. So it's one of those things, like when people are equipped with that knowledge, it really helps. And that's, again, perfect segue into the methods of consumption. You can smoke, you can vape, you can eat, you can apply it topically. In terms of availability, the legal stores, both recreationally and medical websites that cater to medical patients, offer all of those products. The nice thing about smoking or vaporizing your cannabis is the immediacy of the effects. Okay, so the same way that a puffer, like when you're short of breath, you take a puffer, it works right away. There's a reason that puffers are not pills. Can you imagine being short of breath and taking a pill and being like, okay, 45 minutes to go? Like you need something into your bloodstream, into your system right away. So inhaled medication, downside, your lungs are shitty. Pro, your medication works within 1 to 5 minutes. And if you're having a panic attack, or you're in pain, or you feel a migraine coming on, or if you're about to puke, doesn't matter that it hurts your lungs, you're going to be vaping it or smoking it if you know that that's how it affects you. I mean, when I'm hungover or feel nauseous, there's no way I'm going to go take a Gravol when I could puff on something that's going to work in like 2 minutes, right? It comes down to comfort. And with medical patients, if they're really sick, really in pain, they're always going to go for that quicker option. That's kind of the pro and con of the inhaled medication. Oral cannabis is that sketchy area where everyone's like, oh God, like edibles. I've heard horror stories.
Yeah, we all have one, I think.
Yeah, everyone has one. And it's always somebody who's like, hey, Maddie, I bought those gummies and I took one and I know you said not to, but I didn't feel anything. So I took 3 more and I'm like, oh God. So it's always somebody who kind of underestimates their edible. There's a meme online that I saw that's like, edibles only kick in after they hear you talking shit about them. Right? So it's like you're sitting there like, this thing doesn't work. Oh shit, I'm really
all of a sudden,
it's so hard with edibles because I was telling you, you have these giant dudes, you have these tiny little old ladies, and you'd think, okay, this dude's going to be able to handle this gummy. This lady's going to be stoned as hell. And it's not like that. So it always comes down with edibles or oral oils, that the things that I provide, is waiting, is being patient, starting low and going slow. It's like ultimate nursing advice. You use that with everything. So instead of trying 10 milligrams of THC for the first time, you're going to try 2.5, which, that's hilarious. That's like minuscule. You have no idea how strong orally ingested THC is compared to smoking. Doesn't matter if you can smoke a joint. I can smoke 10 joints in a row. I still can't have too many edibles. It's just not my metabolism or body type. People are like, what, Maddie, you smoke like all day, every day, you have for 15 years. Yeah. And I mean, I'd love to take edibles, but they just mess me up. I get too stoned. There's no like, I can take 5 milligrams. I feel great. If I take 30 milligrams, I'm like high as hell. And then I have friends that are like, I don't even feel anything until 100 milligrams. Like, it's just a matter of starting low, going slow, and being like, okay, I didn't feel anything until I got to 30 milligrams, felt great. But when I took 50, it was too much and I felt awful. Right? So it's like alcohol. You do it a few times, especially when you're just starting, like as a teenager, you puke every time you drink because you're like, what is moderation?
Yeah.
With cannabis, it's the same. You figure it out slowly and slowly. It's just when you've had that experience of like how shitty it feels to have a hangover or puke or have those horrible green out gummy stories, then you don't do it again. Like you literally are like, that was the worst last time. This time I'm going to have this much of an amount. So the reason that oral meds are so much stronger than just smoking is because it goes through your liver. It gets processed by something in your liver called your CA3, which makes it metabolizes it. When you inhale it or smoke it, it doesn't go through your liver. It's a totally different process. So it's just a stronger effect. You always have to be more cautious with edibles than you would be with smoking or inhaling. When you smoke or inhale, you might be feeling those effects for 2 hours. If you eat your cannabis, 6 to 12 hours, like again, depending on your metabolism. So if you have too much and you're like, oh my God, I want this to stop, you might have 10 hours to go. So really, really trying to reiterate to people, you can always take more, but taking less is harder. And on that note, vitamin C does make cannabis exit your system faster. So if you do find you're at a party and someone's had too much of an edible, chewable vitamin C tablets, orange juice, people sober up pretty quickly.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's nice to have that knowledge too. If you are like, maybe I'll start experimenting with THC for sleep, but I'm really scared of being stoned. So buy some chewable vitamin C and have them at your bedside and be reassured by the fact that if you are too stoned, you have this kind of little sober up tool that'll help you out.
Yeah. And just to clarify too, vitamin C, like you can't really overdose on that, correct? Like there's no adverse health effects. Like if you,
yeah, like, I mean, when I say take a couple vitamin C, I mean, they're usually dosed at 500 milligram tablets. They're like orange or tropical fruit flavored to make them appealing for children. If you're feeling super, super stoned, I would take 2 of those. Right. Or have a big glass of orange juice. It's the exact same thing. You want to have 1,000 milligrams or so of vitamin C in your to kind of counteract the CBD or THC or whatever it is.
So are there things like, when you're drinking or something, if you've had an empty stomach and you get drunk faster, is there similar things like, especially if you're experimenting with THC, that will have different effects on the way it's going to interact with your body?
Yeah,
There
for
is.
sure.
So what are some of those things?
So cannabis is fat soluble, so it's always going to work with fat. So if you're like, sitting there and you took your THC gummy after your hangover and you're sitting there all day and it's not working, and then you go out and eat a big greasy meal, boom, your cannabis has something to kind of bind to and you're stoned 8 hours later. So I always tell people to have their cannabis with food. It makes it not only effective, but it also doesn't give you that like creeper high 8 hours later when maybe you didn't want to be high 8 hours later. So I always advise people take their cannabis with something, especially if they're sensitive to medication. Usually, like if you're the type of person that Tylenol upsets your stomach, then there's a chance that THC or CBD could as well. So have, crackers or toast before you have it, type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I've always been curious about, and I guess it comes into that question about tolerance, and it's kind of a little off topic from the Cannabis 101, but
no, go for it.
You mentioned like, you've been smoking for 15 years all day, and like, you're such a great orator, you're, communicative, like all those things. I have friends that literally cannot function if they are not stoned at this point. Like if they don't wake up and smoke their joint, they're pretty much useless.
Yeah, for sure.
I think a lot of people are curious about like what is some of the science behind that? What makes that kind of become a person's life?
Because those are the people that are using it like a medicine because their body needs it, right? Like people are like, you're doing a talk to 15 doctors and you've smoked 10 grams of weed today. And I'm like, dude, you would not want me to do this talk if I didn't smoke 10 grams of weed. I'd be like, I wouldn't know what to say. I wouldn't be able to string a thought together. The same way, like if you just took away an SSRI from somebody who's had it for 15 years, they'd be like, yo, like what the hell is going on? I can't do anything. My mood, I'm not motivated. It's just kind of further evidence that people really rely on it as a medicine. And those might be like 30-year-old dudes being like, no, I just love being stoned. Like, nope, there's something that your body, whether it's pain or sleep or anxiety or ADHD, there's lots of male and female people who are like on the autism or Asperger's spectrum. They deal with a lot of social anxiety. Maybe if you're a tiny bit stoned, you can literally have friends in a social circle versus you can't if you don't have that kind of I don't know how to phrase it, if you don't have that kind of vice to make you a little bit more relaxed. And if it's the difference of I need to smoke half a joint or I need to take a benzodiazepine, an anti-anxiety med before I go out, and smoke your joint. Like it's far less addictive. It's far less detrimental to your health long term, with the exception of the actual smoking part is not fantastic for you. But I don't think there are many doctors anymore who are arguing that cannabis or CBD in particular are bad for you unless you are like 12 years old. If you're 12, don't use large amounts of THC, right? It's people over 25 when your brain's developed that you can take this as a medicine and really have the effect. The same way when kids are 12 and you're like, oh yeah, they're on, Prozac or they're on whatever medication, you're like, oh man, they're young to be on that, and won't it change their brain chemistry? Like it very well could, and so could cannabis. Like all medication is medication. They all have their risks. They all have their pros and cons. Like I'm a nurse, I would never knock or discriminate against things like antidepressants. Like I was on them for years. I still have a prescription for anxiety for things like flying, but there are things that are, in terms of my care anyway, I have more pros in the cannabis category than I did in the anti-anxiety med category. And I think that's what you'll start to notice too, if you go through your head and you're like, who are those people in my life who are like just unable to get through the day without smoking a joint? Oh yeah, that person has Crohn's disease, or oh my God, that person has back pain, or that person complains all the time about not being able to sleep, or, oh man, I know that dude has anxiety, or whatever it is. It usually ends up being that they're using it as a medicine without even knowing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned, so you said there's pros and cons. You mentioned, we don't know the long-term effects other than the smoking.
Yeah.
What are some things, just to be transparent, like what are some things people should be aware of or, be cautious of if they're going to dive into this sort of medicine?
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of people are like, it's fine, you can't overdose, it's not addictive, like it's fine, you can literally do as much as you want, you'll just pass out.
Yes, I know what you mean. I think that cannabis is often touted as like a cure-all, like, oh, just there's no risk for it, there's no issue, just take it, no one's ever died. I wish that I could say that nobody's ever died. There have been patients who have died from cardiac issues relating to cannabis. There have been multiple people who have died from motor vehicle collisions relating to cannabis. Now, the only thing I'll say about that data is when they test people who have died in a collision and that person tests positive for cannabis, they're not clarifying whether the accident was that person's fault. Right. So, obviously still not a good thing, but did that contribute to their death, or was it somebody who literally ran a red light and hit them, right?
Yeah.
Point is, there have absolutely been cannabis deaths. I think the weed industry is a bit notorious for being like, oh, it cures cancer, you can't overdose, you can't overdo it. No, that's not exactly true. Am I as worried about people experimenting with cannabis as I am with fentanyl? Absolutely not. Can you overdose on cannabis? Absolutely. Can you die from the overdose on cannabis? Probably not. Can patients with pre-existing heart conditions die from an overdose on cannabis? Probably. Can somebody who, and this is where I do want to be very, very careful. Schizophrenia is a genetic condition. That means that if somebody in your family or yourself, you have schizophrenia, you have a genetic, there's a genetic test to run for it, and they can see and say you have the link or gene for schizophrenia. If your family history has schizophrenia within it, cannabis can activate that gene. So for myself, my family has no family history of schizophrenia. I can smoke as much THC as I want. It will never just ignite schizophrenia within me. If my partner has a mom who has schizophrenia and she takes cannabis every day, you could spark that genetic component for schizophrenia to take effect when it otherwise would not have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I've heard that argument with people who are against it, that it causes schizophrenia.
You cannot just develop schizophrenia from cannabis. That would be interesting. Right. You have to have the gene, and that gene is activated through THC. And that is 100% legit. If I have a patient who has self-declared schizophrenia, I have to say it's for your benefit and safety. It's just not a good thing for you to use THC, and I can't condone it as a nurse. The problem, or not problem, but the kind of issue that comes up now is they can walk down the street and buy it anyway. If I say, man, if you've never had a schizophrenic break, you're feeling good, but you have a family history, just don't do that to yourself. It's such a difficult disease to manage. It's really tricky. But I could tell them that all day, and they can walk down the street and buy it or order it online or find it on the street, right? So it's just trying to educate people and provide that information. If they choose to kind of believe it or not, at least I've kind of done my due diligence in saying this really isn't a great choice for you. And now maybe people listening are like, oh shit, I was about to try this and now I won't. Awesome. I'm glad that it kind of puts that message out there, but it's frustrating for sure to just hear, uninformed or uneducated people being like, oh, cannabis use causes schizophrenia. Like, that's really not how it works, right? So I always try to bring that up with any type of talk just to further get the message out there. I wish and hope that there is a point when doctors are comfortable treating schizophrenic patients with CBD only compounds, but they're just not there yet. I'm sure they're all just terrified of causing a negative reaction in somebody who doesn't have it. Schizophrenia is horrible, a horrible disease to live with and manage. I just don't think anyone's willing to take that risk.
Yeah. So, we referenced it before. So the difference between cannabis and hemp.
Yes.
Because like when I was doing the initial research on this product, I was like, oh man, I thought those were the same things.
Yeah.
Like what? Like
So
is it
weird.
not? So
Yeah.
what's the difference? What's maybe the benefit of using one over the other, and maybe why you chose to use the hemp product versus the cannabis product?
Yeah. So you can either, you can extract CBD from two places. You can get it from a cannabis plant where it's 20% THC and 20% CBD, and they've actually bred different species of plants to get it down to 1% THC and still 20% CBD. So then they extract the CBD from the cannabis plant and they use it. That's what the government does. So that's what, if you walk into the Hobo store or Stash & Co. or Fire and Flower or One Plant, all of those stores are selling CBD oil derived from cannabis because that's what the government has legalized for those stores to sell. Now, what they have not legalized or touched on or kind of regulated is the hemp industry. They have not given the government permission to sell hemp-based oils. Now, I said you could extract CBD from a cannabis plant. You can also extract CBD from a hemp plant. You look at them under a microscope, CBD molecule, same thing. If you extract it from either place, you're getting molecularly the same thing. What some people find is that cannabis-derived oils, because you're getting CBD and a little bit of THC, even if it's in minuscule amounts, it's providing what's called the entourage effect, where multiple cannabinoids, so THC, CBD, etc., are working together, and it makes them work better. Okay? Many people find that they're like, oh, that's cool. I feel amazing with my CBD oil, the hemp-derived one. It's incredible. And it allows for us to give it to animals. That's the big thing that we see within our shop. And that's why Tiffany and I decided to use hemp-based product. First reason is because in order to sell cannabis, you have to be a government regulated producer. Like it's just the law. That's what we were joking about before. Like now that weed's legal, you can't just like open up a store and sell your weed that you grow in your backyard. It has to be government regulated and standards, but they have not done that with hemp, meaning the product that Tiffany and I are making is not technically in the cannabis category, but it's not in any category. It hasn't been regulated yet in Canada. In the States, the reason I brought up the pet stuff is because the hemp-based CBD industry in the States, $2.2 billion predicted as the industry total for this year, because as long as it's hemp derived and there is no THC in it, you can give it to dogs. People are freaking obsessed with their animals, their dogs, their cats, their bunnies, whatever it is. I have bunnies, cats, dogs, ferrets, all sorts of things as clients now because we are producing CBD derived from hemp, where there is no chance at all that the animal is intoxicated. You cannot and should not be going to a government store and purchasing CBD oil. Even if it says 1% THC, your animal will be impaired by that. And you cannot reassure an animal when they're stoned the way you can a human. You can't be like, don't worry, man, like you'll be like not high in a couple hours. They will be terrified, they'll puke, they'll be shaky, they lose their balance. It's not fun. THC and animals do not mix. Some people are like, oh, well, my dog's dying of cancer. I gave him half of a weed cookie. No, don't do it. Not a good idea. You might think like, oh, they're stoned, they're relaxed. They're not stoned. They're not relaxed. They don't feel good. Dogs need to receive hemp-derived CBD where there is absolutely no THC. It has to be that way. And that's why in the States, they've legalized hemp CBD. And it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry because there's more and more people using it, having good results, having anecdotal, feedback to provide these pet companies. So the same way it's been legalized in the States and is now able to be sold everywhere. You can sell CBD oil as long as it's from hemp. You can sell it in a gas station in the States. Oh, wow. Until they do that here, Tiffany and I just kind of sell it out of the house in hopes that laws change soon to reflect the fact that we can sell it on a larger scale. It's so funny that the USA is ahead of Canada in a drug law. That's not usually how it works.
Right.
But the USA has realized, oh shit, everybody and their mom wants CBD. We want the tax money. Okay, everyone can sell it as long as it's from hemp. Who cares as long as it's from hemp? There's no THC. We're not worried about people being stoned and driving or kids getting into it or whatever. It takes that, again, that kind of deterrent of THC that it brings, it takes that away. And that's why the states have said, I think it's most states have said, screw it, go for it as long as it's the hemp derivative and not cannabis.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, it's not even federally, legalized in the states, and there's still still gets
wild.
penalized and criminalized in a lot of states. And so I found interesting.
And in Shoppers and Sephora, you'll notice like beauty products now marketed with like hemp and, it's called like Kush mascara, because in the States, you can incorporate hemp-based CBD into skincare. And then at the border, when they see, oh, it's a shipment of stuff from Sephora, no problem, they bring it in and it's sold in Canada. Whereas if they actually took a moment to be like, wait, Canada's not allowed to sell this hemp stuff, but they don't see it as a red flag because it's a makeup company, right?
Right.
It's so tricky. And that's why I say, cannabis podcasts should be like monthly, because everything changes all the time. If I came on and did a talk with you again in a month, I might say, well, some advocates up in Toronto did some work and it looks like the hemp laws are going to go through like the Senate or whatever it is, right? It's so interesting to see how the industry is progressing. So I'm always happy to kind of come and check in on stuff too and see how things are progressing as legalization gets further and further along.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you, like, what is there a big holdup? I know there's so much in the world right now to worry about. I don't know where that would be on the list of, things to tackle. But
the hemp side.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think honestly, I tell people on the phone, I don't think they're even going to touch on it until 5 years from now.
It bugs me how slow the government is.
Oh, they just don't understand. Then they're like, oh, we don't have the money to do that. And it's like, but do you know how much money you would make if everywhere was allowed to sell it? Like, imagine bars. Imagine you go to Heart and Crown for a beer, but instead of a beer, you could have a hemp-based CBD shot instead. Why the hell not? Like, the money will go to the government, the tax money, right? It's just... They don't realize how beneficial it could be. And I think now that they're starting to see things come out of the States where they're like, wait, they made how much in the pet industry off the CBD? Maybe then, but I think it's going to be a while before, Tiffany and I could open a little store on the corner and have our products there. For now, we're just kind of like getting our products lab tested, making sure that our actual CBD is lab tested and derived from hemp from a facility in the States where they are legally producing it, and therefore it has health standards. We can't do much else until then. We're just kind of like hoping that we're flying under the radar with our lotions and balms, and that we're not, too much of a red flag for people, because we have enough patients that use it and kind of rely on it that I think the pros outweigh the cons in terms of the risk and benefit. You know what I mean?
No. And I was curious because, even though I'm a man who uses moisturizer on my face because I don't want wrinkles, I think, men still aren't really there. But the reason I bring that up is just a lot of people who listen to my podcast are women. Yeah. And you do sell serums and balms and all these different things. And
yes,
what is... like, does CBD do something in those products as well that help? I don't know, whether it's your skin or anti-aging properties or...
Yeah, totally. CBD is great for, because it's so good for inflammation, anything from like acne related redness to psoriasis to eczema to puffiness under your eyes. That's all inflammation. We incorporate different oils into our face serums and our lotions that are really skin friendly. So things like jojoba oil, black cumin seed oil, which are like really high-end, high-quality skincare ingredients. The essential oil blends that we use are all targeted towards certain things. So, we have a rose facial serum that was just actually picked up by a larger company because it's so popular. Rose as a general scent and kind of product is really well known in skincare for its ability to moisturize, for its ability to reduce age lines, wrinkles, age spots. So, when you incorporate those products with jojoba oil, which actually mimics skin, it's one of the closest oils to human skin in terms of the same kind of pH and consistency. And then black seed oil or black cumin seed oil, which is fantastic for everything from inflammation to blood flow. So when your circulation's better, you're getting more oxygen to your skin and it heals better. The face serums probably are the thing we get the most feedback from. The topical balms and lotions are often used more for things like pain, whereas the face serums really tend to be more like cosmetic. Tiffany and I use them in the morning before we put on our makeup and at night after we take it off. And the feedback we get on them is just wild. People saying everything from, I haven't bought moisturizer in months, to this is the best skincare product I've ever had, to I've never had my skin be so clear. I think it's a combination of, the things I was talking about, the essential oils, the high-end plant products, but CBD is all around a pretty amazing drug. It does have its risks like any drug, but its pros list is infinitely longer than its risks list. And the more and more we study it, the more and more it seems to be effective for more and more. So we're just kind of gathering our data and hopeful that government stuff will speed up or at least be a bit more inclusive of the hemp stuff. But until then, we're happy to have people contact us on Instagram or email or through text, whatever. We can always do consults with people via Zoom or on the phone. And we are always happy to connect people who really want medical access. Maybe they just need information from me and then they're going to go to the recreational store by themselves. Or maybe they want a medical appointment with a doctor with a prescription where they can write it off on their insurance, which is a thing now. So
I was watching your Instagram live when you were doing that, and I found that super interesting. And I think that's a good question. So, someone like me who maybe would be like, maybe I want like a medical prescription that would be covered by my insurance. Like, how do you go about, can you just literally go to your doctor and be like, yo, I want medical cannabis? Like, is that like really as easy as that? Or is there like a huge kind of like,
no, that's
forms and
that's technically it. Any doctor or nurse practitioner anywhere in Canada has the right and allowance to prescribe cannabis. Some of them will say like, oh, I'm not allowed, or I don't do that, I don't have the training. There is no training. The only specific training there is for doctors or nurse practitioners is in regards to methadone and Suboxone. So those are, again, totally unrelated, but any doctor, any nurse practitioner can prescribe cannabis. And if they're unwilling or unable due to a lack of education, they can write a referral that says, this is my patient Ryan. He has anxiety. He has been using cannabis and wants a prescription. I don't know where to start. And you would bring that referral to one of those cannabis clinics that I used to work at, and their doctor, who's super cannabis savvy, who's done his research or who's seen it work firsthand, would say, oh, I see this paperwork from your doctor. He confirms you've had anxiety for 3 years. You've tried standard meds. Let's get you a cannabis prescription. And that's what my friends do through their clinic Hybrid Farm on Richmond Road. Is my patients who do end up saying, I want a medical prescription, or I need a medical prescription, or I think it's best for me to get it just to protect myself if ever I go over the border and they accidentally find it on me. Whatever your reason may be, maybe you're a police officer and you just want to have protection. There's always benefit to getting your prescription. You get a chance for education, asking questions, and more importantly, it covers you should you ever need it for legal reasons, and more importantly, cover you in terms of insurance. So hopefully it's the same way you get your antidepressants, you pay $3. It should be like that eventually for cannabis for everybody. Right now it's a little trickier, but we're getting there. They are covering things like anxiety and pain and insomnia. So even ADHD, we're seeing coverage.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah. Interesting. And you said it's a Hybrid Farm on Richmond. I mean, that's for those in Ottawa. And they will see actually anybody in Ontario virtually or via Skype. Their doctor will do the same thing. Send your medical history in and they'll give you a shout and you'll have your prescription later that afternoon. Wow. It's so funny how much we don't know our own rights when it comes to our health care or our health advice, right? Like, I don't even know. I can ask my doctor for this. Like, before,
it's funny.
You get the stigma and it's like, well, I don't want, like, the doctor's going to think I'm a junkie or something, and
exactly. It's really too bad. And there are people that are too hesitant to ever tell their doctors that they're using it for that reason. And it shouldn't be like that. If your doctor isn't pro cannabis. They don't have to be, but as a patient, all they have to do is listen to you and refer you to what's best. So especially if you're somebody who's been struggling for a long time, if you've tried 10 different meds over the past 10 years, yeah, you should probably try cannabis. It's probably reasonable that it's something you could try now. So anytime people have questions like that, they're welcome to get in touch. The other reason I love connecting people with Hybrid Farm is if they are high risk, meaning they do have MS, or they are a cancer patient, or they're palliative, or they're 95 and they take 100 meds a day. I want those people to go to Hybrid Farm for the sole purpose of meeting the owner, Rahim, who is a pharmacist, and he has his doctorate in pharmacy with a specialty in cannabis. So if you pull out your med list and you're like, this is what I'm on, he's going to be like, oh, fuck, no problem, go for it. Or he's going to be like, dear God, don't take this, or you're going to, have X, Y, and Z. And that's huge for people who are baby boomers, who are really sick, who have multiple comorbidities, who shouldn't be just trialing meds willy-nilly because their grandson was like, oh yeah, you'll be fine with weed, no problem. Like, you really should talk to a nurse or a doctor or a pharmacist if it's something that you want to do medically. The same way you wouldn't just go to a random person if you wanted a migraine medication or an antidepressant. Like, you go to the healthcare providers when you want to use it like a medicine. So that's why I find that I'm here. My partner makes the vast majority of our products, and we work really well as a team together in that I provide education and kind of support to people, and she's providing the physical products that people tell me they need. So, I had 10 women message me saying my period pain is so bad that I miss work. So we designed a balm that is good for period pain based on the essential oil blend, based on the amount of CBD, based on the plant-based oils that we incorporated into it. So Tiffany does her research with what product's going to be effective for what thing, and kind of follows that path. And that's why I think we've had such good feedback on things like our headache balm or our neuralgia balm, which is designed for neuropathic pain, because we really have chosen items and ingredients that will benefit those conditions.
Yeah, I love that teamwork where you get the shit and also make a good product. You're not just like two bros in the basement. You're like, yo, man, let's like sell people some CBD stuff. And like,
yeah. Oh, I tell people, like, without Tiffany, I would just have CBD in a bottle of Lubriderm that I would give to people and be like, try to like rub this in together or something. I don't know. So she's great. She's very good at all that stuff. And she built our website. She does our all of our branding and our like our business cards, everything like that. So we're very lucky for sure. And she's also happy to answer questions too about product specifics, or people who have allergies, or if people say, my 9 friends and I are part of the Lyme Disease Society. We all have this issue with itch. Can you make a product that helps with itch? Like, yeah, we want to be able to do that for people. So, if you have questions, things like that, we're happy to have people be put in touch with us through whatever social media means works best.
That's awesome.
Well,
this has been great. A great education process for me, and I know
awesome.
for a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Of course.
If people want to get in touch with you, whether it's the website or social media, where do they find you at?
Whichever. So like they're welcome to the MBL Apothecary.ca website. They're welcome to the MBL Apothecary Instagram. My personal Instagram is Mads Bees, just MADZBZ. The website has my cell phone number on it. So honestly, you could literally reach me pretty much everywhere through any means you want. And I don't mind at all. I get some strange calls all the time from people with varying illnesses or things like that. And I'm happy to help. And I'll try to point you in the right direction if I'm not able to help. If you're really dealing with something complex, I'm going to ship you over to Hybrid Farm, where they have the doctor and the pharmacist and stuff to follow you, versus if you just need more insight or information more than anything. So whatever people want, they can contact me. And we really appreciate you having us on the show too. It's been nice to be able to chat about a lot of that stuff and get the message out there to even more people. So yeah,
and I think education is so important, and I think that's where the legalization kind of like we kind of missed that part from the government. Like, I know they had the resources and things there, but it's like people aren't going to search that. They're not going to read a big long article, right? They want to hear like people who have firsthand experience, who have studied it, have worked in it. I don't want to read some random article, right? Like,
And I mean, I wrote emails to the government like a lot, being like, I will go out to every school and every healthcare center for free and do this education. And they never even emailed me back. So
wild. That's generous of you, because that's taking on a lot. But
yeah, I mean, but I was happy. Like, you have like Mothers Against Drunk Driving at every school. So fuck, send me in, and like, I'll do it for free. I'll do it at any age group. And there's just like silence. Like, okay, well, don't say that you don't have the like funding or the healthcare capacity. Like, man, I'll do it. I'll do it on Zoom for the whole school board if you want, but you know, they have to be willing too, which I think that stigma is alive and real, right? It takes a while to get rid of those biases in society, whether it's cannabis or racism or LGBTQ stuff. I think it takes a long time and a lot of educating people and trying to not like lose your patience with people who need that education, right? It's not my job to make sure everyone in Ottawa is informed about their weed before they buy it, but I want to help people so they don't feel like shit when they buy it. You know what I mean? So we'll figure it out. I think we're slowly reaching the masses, but anything I can do to help, just let me know.
Appreciate that.
Cool.
MBL Apothecary, go check them out. Personal recommendation for me. Maddie, thank you so much. It's been
awesome, man. Have a good day. We'll chat soon.
Yeah, you too. Cheers.
Bye.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.